Mulvenaka, and welcome to Fiji BC, a 4-part video podcast series that's going to delve deep into Fiji's history, way long ago before we had recorded contact. This show is mainly put together because I was curious about our history, and rather than looking up dusty old PDFs scanned and kept in a museum, I think it's better if I actually spoke to someone who's very knowledgeable about our history, and go from there and see what I can learn about how Fijians lived back in the day. And of course, the person to get would be none other than Mr. Simione Sevudredre, who's our main guest star for this show. Guest. I think, it's funny, like I'm saying guest, but there's only one. He's the main guy. So we only ever have him for all 4 episodes, and I'm glad because he's the go-to guy for anything and everything old school Fiji. But before we get into that, I just want to explain why the show is called Fiji BC is because, BC stands for before Christ. It could be a number of other things, before contact, before Christianity, before colonialism, any of those things. And so we have 4 episodes that we're going to get into different aspects of Fiji's history. This first episode is all about Fiji's society and the roles that people lived in back in the day. Before we get into that, I would like to introduce our guest, Mr. Sevudredre. If you could please introduce yourself and just
Thank you.
Where you're from, your job, your current job, and
Thank
all
you.
about that.
Mulabinaka, everyone. I'm originally from the north of the Telebo province, and I work with the Ministry of iTaukei Affairs. There's a department in there. It's known as the Department of Institute of Language and Culture. So that's where I have been for the past.
Yeah, how long?
11 years.
11 years.
11 years? No, going on to 12. I feel like a piece of furniture.
Piece of history. No, I shouldn't say that.
Yes, you mentioned old school, and immediately I saw myself in a glass display.
Man, no, don't be.
But yes, that's where I have been for the past 12 years. Reading, researching, and talking about, and I'm glad you brought this discussion, made it possible, because most of the time, these issues that we will be discussing, I have been articulating it in the Fijian language. So the opportunity to speak in English has been very, very.
Yeah, well, I have to put a sort of reason why, because because my Fijian's not so good, So sure I can follow along with the shows that you have that have the subtitles, but it's nice to actually ask this question in English because I can better articulate myself.
Well, not only that, because there hasn't been any interest outside requiring me to speak English. That's
okay.
It has nothing to do with the respect. No, it's more.
Thank goodness.
It's more interest in contemporary affairs, etc.
Right.
But what people forget is what happens today had its beginnings way back.
Right.
And I like how you say BC. C can set before Christ, before contact, before colonialism.
There's a lot of C's that we can put there, like.
I think 3 enough.
Okay, sir. We'll try our luck with the next episodes.
Yeah.
All right. So for this one, as a sort of like how it starts off, we'll start off like a broad overview of the show, of the things that we want to discuss about old Fiji. And I guess the grand overview is like what was, and of course, all these questions will be centered around what Fiji was like before any actual Western recordings were done. So the first question, like the most obvious question is like, how do you know what you know? Like how, if all our previous history back in the day wasn't recorded like on pen and paper and like kept in the actual, archives and all, how do we know what we know back then if it was all just verbal, if it all was just oral? How was the history passed down through the ages to the point today that we still know some of it?
I thank you for that question. How do we know outside the written texts, outside the whatever has been written? For the iTaukei culture and many Pacific cultures, we are primarily oral. Talanoa gets passed down through stories. And most of the stories in Fiji and also in the Pacific, history is encoded in names of places, names of people, and even names of houses and the foundation a house is built on. The names tell a story. In fact, we may say from contemporary perspective that the people pre-Western in Fiji may have not had any education, but they had the foresight to weave a story in the naming of a place, and the naming of a person, or the naming of a site. And also the naming of certain customs. Here we are today in 2021, but there were customs that were established, and the name in itself defines the custom.
The actual act of carrying out something.
Yes. So fast forward to when the whalers, traders, missionaries came, they focused on what was actually manifested or expressed. And they wrote about it, which was true to a certain extent, but not entirely true, because there were certain stories that they missed. And those, because when you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer.
Right. It's a tricky thing about
yes.
I guess with the first contact with back in the day, they were more concerned about I guess recording from their perspective.
From their perspective.
Yeah, and so if they don't understand something, it just doesn't get recorded.
Yes.
Which then falls onto, I guess us trying to figure out half of what is not recorded.
If they also don't have the sense, but that's when they don't have the sense, the sensitivity. There's an example. There's this a trader / whaler, Cannibal Jack.
Oh, okay.
He observed that there were these particular people from a particular tribe who were doing the menial chores at the home of a very high chief. And in his observation, he mentions that these people were slaves to the high chief because they were confined to the menial roles of gathering firewood, doing the cooking, etc., menial servants.
Right.
But what he did not realize is these people were the elders of the high chief.
Oh.
And in their role as elders, in their attempt to keep the high chief sacred, they allowed themselves to do all the everyday menial chores, thereby keeping the chief sacred.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Because for us, in general, it's always respect your elders, make sure they put their feet up, and you do all the things for them. But back in the day, it was different. Eh?
Yes.
I guess especially with how much power chiefs in those days had, which was pretty...
When you mention power, so that same illustration, a chief's power is actually derived from the menial, from the common people. He or she would not have the chance to become sacred if the people don't elevate him or her.
Ah, okay.
Don't touch this, don't say this, don't do this, we will do the dirty work for you. And thus, the outsiders, the whalers, the traders, and missionaries, they see this one has power. No. The powerhouse is the ones you do not see. And these are the ones behind the chief. This is where their roles, roles come into.
Right. Well, this is a good segue into the next part because I wanted to talk about roles, of Fiji society back in the day. Um, there, like some of the roles have sort of carried over till today. How we have the gang of fish, the gang who do carpentry, the gang. So those particular roles. Could you go a bit more into detail about the types of roles that were present in Fiji society back then?
Okay. Thank you for asking that question. There are 7 generic roles that is known in Fiji today.
Today, eh?
Today.
Okay.
See, those 7 only apply to certain parts of Fiji. Say, for example, when we discuss the issue of traditional roles, there are those who say, okay, there's the chief, and there's the oracle priest, and there's the spokesperson or the herald. And then there are the fisher folk, and there are the craftspeople, and there are the warriors, and there are the kingmakers. That's the generic 7. But if we say, for example, we go to certain part of Fiji, like in the Lao group, like in all southern parts of Olomaiviti, the generic I mentioned is there's a chief and there's one who speaks on his behalf, the Matunivanua, the herald.
Yeah.
But in other areas of Fiji, the role of the herald is split into 2. There's a herald, a role who's like the personal secretary who just deals with the events of the day, and there's the one who's actually the press secretary who deals with events outside. The one who deals inside, internally, is called the Vaka, and the one who deals outside is called the Takala. But they're both heralds, but one is confined just to managing the day-to-day internal affairs, and one manages the external affairs. That's one part of Fiji. What I'm trying to say is there are these 7 generic roles that we have accepted today. There is no one-size-fits-all.
Right.
Society is still complex.
Right.
So there is a general understanding that we fit into the 7 roles, but what's actually on the ground differs.
So you're saying like the I think the one who deals with the internal affairs, which is the Vaka. When you say internal affairs, like within the village,
Within the clan.
within the clan.
Yes.
So any like
Intra.
Okay.
Inter, outside,
Yeah.
that's the Takala.
Okay. So when you say like within the clan, what does that look like?
Personal assistant / secretary,
Mm.
ensuring that the communication back and forth.
So anyone who wants to like, oh, I want to go ask something,
Yes.
can't just go straight.
No. And imagine, this was our version of personal assistant / secretary.
Right. Had that back in the
They
day.
had it back then, long before modern society conceived of such a position in corporate world.
And for the other person, the
Takala.
Takala. So when you say he dealt with affairs outside of the, what kind of affairs were those?
Those are the affairs relating to trade, relating to security, relating to other affairs for the stability of the clan.
Right. Okay. And then that'll free the chief up for making those big decisions.
The chief is actually the one who designates the momentum, the action, and whatever has been agreed to, then they take the part and then they run with it, whether it's outside communication or internal.
Okay. So we have those 7 generic roles
Yep.
that have sort of survived to today, and some are specific to certain regions of Fiji.
Yes. Let me also clarify, the 7 generic roles are heavily Eastern Vitilevu biased,
Okay.
which would also include the whole of the Rewa province, Tailevu province, because this was the point of contact for the whalers and the traders. So, and the missionaries.
So that's sort of their
So
influence.
they picked up on that and they wrote on that. And when something is on print, it sort of gains an extra level of mana.
Right.
And by the time people were reading it, they sort of
Accepted.
yes.
Hmm.
But that's what I mentioned before. There is no one size fits all. The generic has passed on. from those days to colonialism, and then it has entered into the pages of the school curriculum.
It's funny because the idea that I was kind of going for in general for starting for this episode was a more like a generic overview of society, but it seems like it's actually very different from like region to region. Before this influence sort of made it more, I guess, common,
Yes.
more like the normal standard. So great, because now most of my questions were like, you know, what is it like? What is the general thing like? What is the general? But I think I might have to change my
We can talk about general.
general.
But just to be sure, just to be clear, Fijian society is, I want to use the word fragmented, but that would mean something in conflict and breaking up. I think, or
Segmented?
segmented,
Independent?
Yeah.
That's probably because we didn't have like a king, right?
Exactly.
Like there was King Zakumbau, but he wasn't really.
He was a king from the Kaibailani who made him king on paper. Well, people on the ground, they had no idea.
So like Fiji, even though it's a region, before they all had their own little, you know, carved out little kingdoms in their own areas. There wasn't like one unifying power to say this is the norm.
Wow.
So I guess that's why dialects and just the different ways have survived. That have survived to today. Each region is still very unique.
Yes.
With how they operate day to day and how they speak as well. Well, with regards to the roles, so even though each was specific, what were the more common roles in society that were sort of common between the regions? So, I mean, we'd have the, you know, if you want to start from the top, we have the chief.
Okay. You know what they teach at social science in early secondary school about modern society?
Yeah.
Democracy is comprised of the executives,
Yeah.
then you have the judiciary, and then you have the legislature.
That's the law structure.
The big structure of democracy. The executives are the ones in power, the prime minister, or the president, or the judiciary is the legal. They interpret the laws, and the legislature is parliament. They make the laws. So when you come to the Fijian society, the parallel to the executives were the chief, the oracle priest or the mbete, and the sauturanga. There is no equal good English translation. But sauturanga, some have called them kingmakers, some call them executive chiefs.
Okay.
Because it's an indigenous word. There is no equal English word for that. So this is the executive. They deliberate. They talanoa. I noticed this function at a recent trip late in 2020 when I visited the village of VCC. We went on some work undertaking, and we were told, go, Sevu with Divunda. When we arrived, we were directed to the chiefly residence, Bunisei. It's majestic looking Wuri. As soon as we entered, what struck my eyes was the Divunda was sitting in the center of the house. They were all seated on the floor. And the door where we entered, there were gentlemen sitting just one step away from the threshold, the door. And so the tribune from where I entered the door, he was in the center. To his right sat his priest, Mbete. To his left sat his herald, Mataniwano. Just next to the herald was the kingmaker, the Sauturanga. And I asked one of the contacts, why are they waiting? And he said, oh no, they're not waiting for you. This is just how
they set up.
This is how we set up. And this is how we are supposed to be.
Oh,
We
wow.
come in and we deliberate. It's not a formal deliberation. It's just that Talano, and in the process, they are talking about the politics, they are talking about the governance, etc. But it's all done in the Pacific, friendly / casual way. But it has
Structure.
seriousness to it and structure. But that, to me, reinforced what I just mentioned, the parallel to the democratic executives. They are there. The chief,
Right.
his kingmaker, his herald, and his oracle priest. They're the ones doing the discussing. They're the ones deliberating. And I found that empowering. I found it wow. I say wow because that structure exists on paper. It's hard to find in many villages, but I saw it in VCC village, and this was late into 2020. So this is common in many clans, the executive, but at least on paper, because they are there to ensure the governance of the community of the clan. These three would be common: the chief, his herald, his priest, Ombete, oracle priest, and the kingmaker, the elder. The kingmaker / executive chief is known as a Sau Turanga. So he is the one who speaks on behalf of the office. Yes, there is a herald.
Yeah, I was just going to ask,
Yes.
where's the herald in this?
The herald communicates between the guests, the visitors, and everybody else to the chief. But the decision / or the policy or what needs to be reinforced falls onto the Sauturanga, the kingmaker. So if you are if you are chief, you'll be talking to your Matanivan or your herald, and whatever has been confirmed from the discussion is confirmed verbally by the herald. Okay, so we are going to ensure this. That's the cue for the kingmaker to then take it and officiate it and implement. That's what I meant by
Sort of like to
proclaiming.
rubber stamp it.
Yep. So he works on the authority of the chief. The spokesman announces. The one actually implements and runs with the decision is the Sauturan.
So that's the power structure at the top within the
Clan.
Yeah.
Clan or tribe, those words are very loosely used in Fiji.
Yeah. So that's sort of at the top. So then if we were to, from the top and then filter our way downwards to what other roles are there beneath the executive committee?
It differs. See, in Western Fiji, we have the roles were defined by the prefix Taukei, Taukei Sawayeke, Taukei Nakelo. For example, using the BCC or the Wunda model. In other parts of Fiji, the roles have this Komai something.
And these are all just titles for
these are titles of the roles. Because we are on BC, the main issues that would be the focus would be the security and the governance. So when it comes to security, it's the literal security.
The warriors?
The warriors. And it's also the food security.
Oh, food security.
Food security. And it's also the other security that's aligned to the spiritual, the gods.
Right.
That's where the priest comes in. So that's where the security regarding the land, regarding the management of the ocean, or regarding management of the streams, the forests.
So stewardship, basically.
That's the word.
Managing the natural resources.
Yes.
So even back then, we were careful with what we had.
Yes.
And there were like protocol to ensure that we didn't
because they
degrade the
believe
land.
then that every element in nature had a guardian, had someone who's watching, a spiritual entity. So these spiritual entities, they each had their priest, but the one who's sitting beside the chief is the overall high priest.
Right.
So he has his own network of little priests.
Right.
The priest of the forest, the priest of the river, the priest of the many.
So sort of like an archbishop at the top, and then you have the...
See, long before the Christianity came in, that's already here.
Yeah. Well, that's good that, there was that sort of structure as well that was in place. So that's so you have the executive committee at the top, and then in the middle, between the executive committee and the dare I say the commoners, is the security level, which is security for all of those various aspects of Fiji life, which is food and actual security as well as.
And the arts. This is where the craftspeople come
Oh,
in.
they come in.
The arts.
Oh, okay.
So, mind you, they were not that what they call what was referred to by some European writer as noble savages.
Oh, okay.
They had these craftsfolk who were engaged to ensure that the craftsfolk would indulge and engage in art. They had to make sure that the security of the land, of the survival, was intact, was guaranteed. Then they ensured that the food security of the artisans was looked into. So once the security, the protection, and the food security was guaranteed, only then will the artists work in peace and come up with those magnificent canoes, come up with those magnificent structures, whether it's made of wood, whether it's made of bandanas, or whatever it's made out of. They will be only able to function if those guarantees are taken care of.
I read something a while back about how, like, the way civilizations develop, you can tell how developed they are by the art. You look at the art, because if they don't have time to create nice art, that's probably because they're busy fighting. So in times of peace, that's where art flourishes. So the way you've described it is that art is also a necessary part of Fijian culture after there's other stuff sorted out first. Security of the land, security of the people, food security, and only then can this kind of things flourish.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that they actually made sure that the artists could work in peace by ensuring the general.
So it's not written. That's the tricky part. This, what I just told you, is not written in any book. But this is when we look at the way the roles are arranged. So if I have to draw 3D, this is the chiefs, these are the priests, these are the whatever.
The executive.
Yes. Directly under the chiefs are the craftsfolk.
Oh wow.
They are like they report directly to the chief, because the chief is the one who actually commissions the art, and they do it on behalf of the chief. So it is the
So stuff like this.
yeah.
He'll be like, oh, one day I want.
Yes.
Oh, and they'll be like, okay, chief wants that. Let's go make
Not
it.
only commission, it is also there as a way of keeping the chief sacred and happy. They also go out of their way to manufacture artifacts to bless the chief. So it's not only just what chief goes, okay, I want a boat. No. They also go out of their way to create, and they use this is where when you talk about creativity, innovation, that's already in place. So it is a two-way traffic, commissioning, and also their weekly quota, whatever the time schedule they would be producing, because that was why. That's their role. That was their function.
So like we have the arts. I'm assuming I'm going to run a lot on assumption until I'm corrected. The other parts is resource gathering and building, the other sort of roles that were present back in the day.
So the artists would have their own little priest.
Oh, okay.
So it differs. There are those whose main art is with wood. Then you have another part who their art is the medium is tapa.
Right.
They would have their little priests, and it is to the priest who ensures that there is alignment. So if the ones who work with wood, the priest then advises, counsels, now you're aligned to go and cut those trees and not those.
Okay.
The weather is right for this. No, don't go today. Go. So those little counseling, the spiritual counseling.
So they really featured heavily in the priests in everyday life. Yeah?
Yep. In fact, there's still a village in Fiji, Navala, the only village which still has the mure. They renew the house posts every 4 or 5 years. And when there comes a time to renew the posts, after village leader has made the decision, the young men then go walk 2-3 miles looking for trees that can become posts, house posts. Once they've selected a tree, they have to actually sing a chant to ask permission from the tree.
Oh, okay.
Give yourself over because you'll be taken to be used as a post. So they sing the chant. It is acknowledging that the tree is a spirit. It goes back. So this is just a contemporary little leftover from those days of
Yeah.
spirituality that it's always
Because I read a lot about other indigenous cultures around the world where they treat nature with a whole lot of respect, and in the belief that aspects of nature had spirits in it, so they always like ask for permission before they did whatever, as well as hunters when they killed an animal, they sort of had a little prayer for it to thank them for like giving their lives so that the village may live on. So it's pretty fascinating, the similarities between the indigenous cultures around the world and their respect for nature. Speaking of like nature, the other aspects of the roles, the other parts of the society. What are the other roles, like because I mentioned there was probably fishermen, were there builders, house builders, boat builders. What other roles sort of filtered down at that part of the hierarchy, so to speak?
They were the warriors, and they were broke into two branches: the personal warriors,
Personal warriors
chief.
for the chief.
Yes, personal guards. These are the most fiercest warriors. Then there were the guards of the frontiers, the boundaries. Then there were the fisher folk. There were also, I mentioned the crafts folk. There were also the Lord of the Green,
Oh,
Tirara.
an arbor. Is that the word? Is it arbor?
The green is the rara, that's the ground.
Right.
You see the way villages are constructed were, and even till today, there has to be a green rara. Because this is where the transactions are conducted. This is where the exchanges, this is where the discussions, the governance, etc. is carried out. And the Lord of the Green is the one who comes and makes the announcement or decides the tribute goes there, the tribute goes there, wherever. But he's the one, remember, because nothing was written.
Right.
The announcement was made. And people listened in from wherever they lived along the fringe of Ferrara. This is our version of transparency.
Oh.
So whatever was announced, it was
That's word.
That was the way it was being made transparent to everyone else. The Lord of the Green is the one who decides if it's a subject village. These are our tributes. Where are the tributes from so and so? Okay, we have these tributes, etc. We are all set. Okay, that's the Lord of the Green. Now we are set to go and offer. Or if it's the leading village, the Lord of the Green is going to accept and say, now we're going to distribute. He acknowledges and he redistributes the tributes. The Lord of the Green, Tirara, it's not an everyday role. It only exists in certain chiefdoms.
And with the design of the village, so you have the rara is usually in the middle, and you have the houses around it. And it seems that the rara is like a special place for
many
all
mistake it as a playground. It isn't.
Yeah.
It's not a playground.
Yeah.
That's our version of our boardroom.
Right.
Room, yeah.
Because most people, the people don't know, they just see an open space. They think that, and that's been kept quite nice, and grass cut. There's no trees in the middle; it's just all open space. They assume that it's a plain space, but
That's
actually
a boardroom, conference room.
Yeah, where a lot of traditional ceremonies they happen on that space. That is right, like the boardroom where you want to get stuff done or announced. You come to the middle there and announce it, and because of the design of the village where they all encircle the ground, whatever you say is heard.
Yes. Do you know why it has to be announced?
Because
Because
they
if
didn't
it's
have
not announced,
it's not.
those people who outsiders, outside representations, missionaries, traders, etc., they've listed as common people. They're not common people. Their allegiance must always be appealed to. If there is lack of transparency, ongoing transparency, they can get up, pack up, and move.
Just like that.
Yeah.
There's
It
no-
has happened in the past, which is why we have this notion of tawu people.
Yeah.
Once the idea, it's because of, some say it's because of warfare, but many forget that it's because of the continuing lack of transparency. They've had enough of this pack and leave.
Aye, that it's something pretty interesting
So
because
that's why the announcement is made, because the ones in power, their sense, their position is only guaranteed if they keep the people satisfied, and their transparency is paramount.
so there is no hard and fast rule. Like if I belong to village A,
I
it's
can
not like
get up
us.
and go.
Oh, wow, that's pretty interesting because my understanding was like, oh, you're born from this village. That's it. You're. Oh,
There's
okay.
there has been a lot of internal migration. There's migration for warfare, there's migration from disgruntlement. We call the word for it is leva.
Yeah,
Go away.
Good to know we still got drama.
Oh,
man.
yes. Wow, yes.
Wow, because that's really fascinating. Because my assumption was that the movement between people was generally warfare, or maybe like starvation or something came up and forced them to move.
That too.
So I guess one of the other reasons would be
The-
unhappiness with the leadership.
Yes.
And if they move out,
And when they move out, this is what happens. There's a gap.
yeah,
There's a gap in the community, in the tribe.
right,
And that gap, because everything is balanced, when one leaves, that unbalance, that opens up opportunities for the chaos. They lose face. When the others see they've gone, okay, we might as well take that group has lost confidence. Why should you remain?
right.
So it's very sensitive. The
Very
ones
sensitive.
in power, really, their power is.
So
It's sharing of power. It's a balance.
So it's funny, like the perception of being in power as a chief. It's like, oh, your power is assured, just like a king. But in this
That's
instance,
what Arthur Gordon came and implemented. He
Oh.
thought the chiefly system is like the British aristocracy,
right, with the king,
where everything is top down. No. The reverse is in Fiji. It's bottom up. The power is given upwards, and if it's taken away, the little rug is removed from under your feet.
hey, like an actual. That's funny.
And then the chief will have to look for people, for subjects who are willing, who will do the speaking. And if word travels fast, we go and ask this place to come and be aligned to us. Naturally, they'll ask, why?
What
Why
happened?
did you treat? What happened to those people? Why should we come to you if you're doing
Right.
that? So it's a very delicate balancing of power.
My mind is like really blown right now. The way the power structure is totally inverted. It's almost like democracy, where well, it's not so much that people vote, but the people have the power.
Yes. But that power was entrenched to be centered in the top when Charles Savage, the Swede, arrived in the Eastern Vitilevu and he came with guns. So with the
that
rule of the
upset
gun,
them.
it just
Yeah, that's right.
subverted
Right,
the
right.
balance.
Whoever had the most power with the
You listen to me, if not hands up or
right. Well, that's pretty upsetting.
yeah.
But it's good to know how it worked back then. So tell me more about the because we all like to hear stories about warriors and whatnot. The Bete, how what is their day to day like? We'll go with the assumption that it's peacetime. What were the Betes up to? What is their role? in
Bete?
general? Yeah. Sorry, not the Bete. The
Bati.
Bati. Right. The Bati.
Bati, they have their temple, their priest, their warrior priest, and
So each
their
aspect of like
Yes,
each role, eh?
yes.
So like there's a
Each role has a spiritual advisor.
okay. So the Batis with their
Yeah,
spiritual advisor.
and the Bati they worship they revere these gods of war, Rokomoko and Rokotavo. They have the Rokomoko is a shapeshifter, is Moko. She comes in the form of a lizard. So during times of peace, there's a traditional counting system is called Tininaiwau sa Dua Nambure, meaning if there are 10 war clubs, they are referred to as Ambure. It's like saying we had 12 eggs. Instead of I have 12 eggs, I have a dozen eggs.
Right.
So the counting. But then the different tens had different nouns. We say 12 eggs, we say 12 pencils, we say everything is a dozen.
Right.
But in Fijian society, no,
Very specific.
the nouns determine the subject or the content. So Mure, 10 war clubs. 10 war clubs refers to 10 warriors. The initiation and the training of young men, each were aligned 10 to Ambure. That's where the counting system came up. So the initiation slash is where they toughen up. They have a drill sergeant. Their priest is the drill sergeant. And he ensures that they abstain from certain food. They only eat this kind of food to toughen them up. And they prepare themselves mentally, spiritually, and they have their little games as a sort of tuning. It's called a game, but it's actually exercises.
Right.
Games are wrong word, exercises.
So this is basically military camp.
It is. Long before the contemporary world came with it. This is how we were in the 13, 14, 1500s.
It's interesting how the priests double as the drill sergeants as well. So they were almost like military priests.
Yeah, that was the military, the Bati, the warriors. Because the priests also, they had to, it was a battle of the wits. So if an enemy was about to attack, the priest, his connection with the spiritual world must be strong. So his radar should be able to pick it out.
It's like, hey, we're going to be under attack
We
soon.
are going to be under attack. Okay. Because priests, by tradition, they travel into the spiritual world and they can read and hear what's about to happen. There's a condition. They have to keep themselves, they have to be in tune. So there are things they have to abstain from. They have to be alone, etc. So they are not corrupted, they're thinking, etc. They're in tune. So the priests. The priests are the ones who determine the seen and the unseen, and they guide the warriors.
Sorry, excuse me.
And some of the powerful tribes in Fiji were able to conquer because their priest's mana was more powerful than the mana of the conquered tribe.
So even before you come down to like military tactics or anything, it's like depends on the...
Yes. It's like the battle between Sauron and Gandalf.
Right.
So whoever has a greater power, eventually Gandalf overcomes Sauron.
See, that's a pop culture reference for you kids out there. Oh, okay, that's really fascinating. So yeah, spirituality does feature a lot heavily in the day-to-day lives of Fijians. Okay, so that's interesting. So we've got the Bati, and like last of all, we've got the other positions, which is the craftsman.
No, there's one I didn't mention.
Oh,
they call them Bauta.
Okay.
These are the ones, they only come to the fore when a chief dies. These are all the official handlers of a chief's corpse.
Do they like run the funeral, or they only ever?
They're the funeral house.
Oh, okay. So they run the.
They run the funeral. They're the ones who actually have the access to touch the chief's body and put it in the ground, bury.
And they are only activated when
the chief dies.
Oh.
During the rest of the time, they carry on with their everyday life as if they're insignificant. They rise to significance when a chief dies. And that is basically the roles in Fiji BC.
Okay.
You carry on as normal. There are times when you have to shape up and step up.
Other times you're called to action.
Yes. Whether you call to action for war, whether you call to action to fish, etc. Other times, normal peace times is normal everyday. Just strengthen your house, ensure that your yam stocks are good, etc. Making sure you feed, etc., etc. The marriages, etc. All the customs.
So life carries out as
Life
normal
carries on.
until situations demand for a certain role to be filled.
And there are established procedures on how to
How to activate the
activate.
network.
We refer to in government as standard operating procedures. It has to be written down, step 1 and then step 2, step 3, step 4. That was already orally entrenched in the community.
That is a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, so that's like a general overview of, but like, yeah, again, when we're saying general, we're trying to define all the general roles, because when it came to different regions and different parts of Fiji, it was a lot different, as we mentioned before, because they all had their own thing going on. There was no one overarching chief to say that this is the way things should be, because
we sort of assumed everything was okay and did not criticize or critique and just agree, okay, we'll go with that.
Right. Well, okay, I'm gonna have to bring this particular episode to an end. It's been a really interesting discussion about Fiji BC back in the day. I keep saying back in the day. I'm sorry. I need to come up with something different.
Yep.
Back a while ago.
Backpacker.
We'll think of something. So that's this episode. We'll cut it here for now. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this show. The sponsors is Weta Fiji for sponsoring this lovely room, as well as giving us a little spot that we can shoot these video podcast episodes. And thank you as well to Dave Lavaki of First Fighter for these nice cameras as well as the lights. He was kind enough to give us his equipment before he scooted off. It's Saturday. He's a busy guy, busy man. And as for, if you want to keep up with the rest of the show, feel free to subscribe to the links at the bottom, the socials, and my website. So that's it for this episode, and feel free to stick around. We have 3 more episodes to go. The next episode will be about spirituality, which is a fun topic to get into. All right, Naka.
Lele,